Most people think Roman food was all luxury feasts, grapes, and wine, but that's not what actually fed the empire. The truth is much plainer and far more surprising. Beneath the image of banquets and excess was a daily diet built on a few unexpected essentials, so crucial their absence could shake entire cities. What were they really eating? To find the answer, sometimes you just need to follow the grain. Wheat was everywhere in the Roman Empire. If you walked through ancient Rome, you'd smell it baking and watch people fighting over who gets the good stuff. Think of wheat as the iPhone of ancient grains. Everyone wanted the premium model, but most people had to settle for the budget version. The wealthy Romans got soft wheat that made fluffy, white bread. Regular folks munched on coarse bread made from emmer wheat, rough, tough, and probably harder to chew than your grandmother's overcooked roast. Here's where things get wild. The Roman government actually gave away free wheat to hundreds of thousands of people through something called the annona. That's like getting free pizza delivery for life, except it's grain and you have to grind it yourself. This wasn't charity, it was smart politics. But Rome couldn't grow enough wheat to feed everyone. They imported massive amounts from Egypt, Sicily, and North Africa. Egypt alone sent over 100,000 tons of wheat to Rome every year. What made wheat special was its versatility. Porridge when times were tough, flat bread when you needed something quick, proper bread when you wanted to show off. Government officials tracked every shipment and every person who qualified for the free grain program. Talk about job security. Imagine telling people your career was professional wheat counting. This wheat obsession came with a cost, though. Rome became completely dependent on imports. If ships didn't arrive, people went hungry. Now, while wheat kept the empire running, there was another grain that soldiers and gladiators swore by. Barley was the tough guy of Roman grains. Roman soldiers ate barley every single day. Gladiators, too. If wheat was the popular kid in school, barley was the kid who could actually fight. Early Romans ate more barley than wheat. Makes sense, right? Barley grows almost anywhere and doesn't complain about poor soil or bad weather. You could plant it in rocky ground that would make wheat cry. But Romans thought barley was inferior to wheat. They ate it, sure, but they weren't happy about it. It was like choosing a flip phone when everyone else had smartphones. It worked, but your social status took a hit. Soldiers got barley rations because it kept them strong and energized. The grain packed enough protein and carbohydrates to fuel grown men carrying 60 pounds of equipment across the empire. Gladiators earned the nickname barley eaters. Because they consumed so much of it, these fighters needed massive amounts of energy for training and combat. Imagine explaining to someone today that ancient superheroes got their power from what we basically consider horse feed. Rural families relied on barley when wheat prices went crazy or harvests failed. They'd make barley porridge or throw it into soups with whatever vegetables they could find. Storage was fantastic. You could keep barley grain for years without it going bad. When famines hit, places with good barley stockpiles could survive. Now, soldiers and gladiators didn't live on barley alone. They needed protein too, and that's where legumes became essential. Lentils were the protein powerhouse that nobody talks about. These tiny seeds fed more Romans than almost any other food. Lentils were like the reliable friend who always shows up when you need help moving, but never gets invited to the fun parties. Romans perfected the art of growing them everywhere. From cold Gaul to hot Syria, lentils adapted and thrived. Farmers loved them because they actually improved soil quality while growing. Poor families survived on lentils. Rich families ate them too, but dressed them up with fancy seasonings and expensive olive oil. The basic preparation was simple. Boil them until soft, then add whatever flavoring you had. But lentils weren't just about filling stomachs. They packed serious nutrition: protein, fiber, iron, basically everything human bodies need. Romans noticed that people who ate lentils regularly stayed healthier and stronger. Dried lentils could last for months, even years, without spoiling. Families would buy huge quantities during harvest season when prices were low. It was like having a grocery store in your basement, except everything was brown and required soaking overnight. Trade networks spread lentils across the entire empire. Ships carried tons of dried lentils from major growing regions to cities. Different types grew in different places. Romans had more lentil varieties than modern people have streaming services, and they were probably more satisfied with their choices. Speaking of ancient wisdom about food, Romans discovered another legume that became just as essential. Chickpeas were the snack food of the Roman Empire. Walk into any tavern or bathhouse, and you'd find people munching on hot roasted chickpeas like we eat popcorn today. Romans basically invented the ancient version of bar nuts, except these were actually nutritious. The Latin name was cicer, which sounds way fancier. These round, beige legumes could be prepared dozens of ways: boiled soft for stews, roasted crunchy for snacking, ground into paste for spreading on bread. Street vendors made fortunes selling hot chickpeas to busy Romans. Picture guys with portable braziers calling out to passing crowds. It was like having food trucks, except the trucks were just guys with cooking pots and loud voices. Taverns served chickpeas with wine because the protein helped slow alcohol absorption. Home cooks got creative too. They'd cook them with leeks for flavor or mash them with olive oil and garlic, creating something like ancient hummus. Spain and the Eastern Mediterranean became major producers, shipping dried chickpeas across the empire. Imagine cargo ships loaded with nothing but chickpeas, the ancient equivalent of a snack food empire. Soldiers appreciated chickpeas for lasting energy. Slaves got them regularly because masters discovered they were cheap, easy to store, and kept workers healthy. Different regions developed signature preparations. Syrian cooks made spicy stews. Spanish producers created unique roasted varieties. But while Romans were perfecting their chickpea game, they were also obsessing over a vegetable that supposedly had magical healing powers. Cabbage was the miracle vegetable of ancient Rome. At least, that's what respected writers kept claiming. Cato the Elder wouldn't shut up about cabbage. The guy wrote about cabbage like it was the cure for everything except bad personalities. Romans ate cabbage raw, boiled, or pickled. Each method supposedly provided different health benefits. Raw cabbage made a crunchy side dish. Boiled cabbage became soft and mild. Pickled cabbage lasted for months. The medicinal properties were taken seriously by educated Romans. They believed cabbage could cleanse the body, improve digestion, and boost overall health. Modern science actually backs up some of these claims, which means ancient Romans accidentally got something right while being completely wrong about almost everything else. Growing cabbage was ridiculously easy. Plant the seeds, water occasionally, harvest when ready. Cabbage tolerated cold weather, poor soil, and general neglect better than most crops. It was like the golden retriever of vegetables, friendly, reliable, and nearly impossible to mess up. Harvest happened in autumn, perfect for winter storage. Families would store dozens of cabbage heads in cool, dry places for months. Poor families just boiled cabbage with water and salt. Wealthy households mixed it with expensive olive oil and imported spices. The ingredient was democratic, but the seasoning definitely wasn't. Medical writers prescribed cabbage for everything. Stomach problems, raw cabbage with vinegar, wounds, crushed cabbage leaves. But while Romans were celebrating their magical green vegetable, they were also building their entire cooking system around two other plants. Onions were in everything. If Romans cooked it, they probably added onions. Trying to find ancient Roman food without onions would be like trying to find modern Italian food without tomatoes. Technically possible, but what's the point? Walk into any Roman kitchen and you'd immediately smell onions cooking. They were the foundation of Roman cuisine. Rich families used onions, poor families used onions. Even slaves got onions in their food, but leeks were considered superior by food snobs. They had a milder, more sophisticated flavor that wealthy Romans preferred. Leeks were like the fancy cousin who went to college, while onions stayed home and did all the actual work. Growing both was straightforward. Plant them, water them, harvest when ready. Both could handle different soil types and weather conditions across the empire. Storage became an art form. Drying onions in the sun created concentrated flavoring that lasted for months. Fresh ones spoiled quickly in warm weather. Raw onions with salt made a simple side dish. Cooked onions sweetened and mellowed completely. Different cooking techniques created different results. It's like onions had multiple personalities, and Romans figured out how to bring out each one. Spanish onions were supposedly the best. Eastern provinces grew superior leeks. The combination of onions and leeks with other ingredients became standard practice. Now, while savory foods dominated Roman meals, there was one sweet ingredient that changed everything. Figs were the candy of the ancient world. Before sugar existed, figs provided the sweetness that made life worth living. Romans basically treated figs like we treat chocolate. They craved them, hoarded them, and got genuinely excited when fig season arrived. Fresh figs were amazing but spoiled within days, so Romans became masters of drying them. Dried figs could last for months, providing sweet energy year-round. Fig trees grew almost everywhere the climate allowed, from Spain to Syria. Picture entire hillsides covered with fig trees stretching to the horizon. It was like having dessert trees scattered across your backyard, if your backyard happened to be 3 continents. But figs weren't just dessert. Romans cooked them into jams, baked them into cakes, and boiled them with wine and honey. They basically invented fruit-forward cuisine 2,000 years before food magazines started using that phrase. The fig tree was sacred in Roman mythology, connected to Rome's founding. Different varieties grew in different regions. Some were large and sweet. Others were smaller but more intensely flavored. Commercial production became serious business. Large estates dedicated entire sections to fig cultivation. Villa owners basically became ancient fruit barons, shipping dried figs across the empire. Rich families had special storage rooms. Poor families kept them in whatever containers they could find. But while figs satisfied Roman sweet teeth, there was another fruit that was even more essential to daily life. Olives were everywhere and in everything. Romans ate actual olives by the handful, not just the oil. They added them to bread, mixed them with cheese, and used them to make simple meals feel more complete. Olives were like the duct tape of Roman cuisine. They fixed everything and made everything better. The preparation was complicated because raw olives taste absolutely terrible. Biting into a fresh olive is like expecting candy and getting soap instead. Romans had to cure them in brine, vinegar, or salt for weeks before they became edible. The process was worth the wait, though. Different curing methods created different flavors. Some families preferred olives soaked in strong vinegar. Others liked them brined in salt water. It was like having multiple versions of the same ingredient, each with its own personality. Green olives were picked early and stayed firm. Black olives ripened longer and became softer. Romans basically discovered that timing is everything, which explains why they were so good at running an empire. Southern Italy, Spain, and North Africa produced millions of olives annually. Urban households bought them since growing olive trees in cities wasn't practical. Properly cured olives lasted for months without spoiling. Having a well-stocked olive supply was like having money in the bank, except more delicious. Spanish olives were prized for size and flavor. African olives had unique characteristics. The combination with bread, cheese, or wine was endless. But while olives satisfied Roman snack cravings, there was another food that provided serious protein. Broad beans were the protein powerhouse for people who couldn't afford meat every day. These large, flat beans packed enough nutrition to keep families healthy. Think of them as the ancient equivalent of protein powder, except they actually tasted like food instead of chalk. The Latin name was fabae, which sounds much more dignified. These weren't tiny like lentils or round like chickpeas. Broad beans were substantial and filling, almost like eating actual meat. They grew well in cooler climates where other legumes struggled. Farmers appreciated crops that didn't require perfect conditions to produce decent harvests. It was like having a backup protein source that could handle whatever weather problems came along. Most families boiled broad beans until soft and creamy. Some mashed them into thick pastes for spreading on bread. Plain beans were nutritious but boring. Smart cooks added garlic, leeks, or fresh mint. The texture was similar to modern refried beans, except Romans invented it first and called it fabae. Romans discovered that beans are like blank canvases. They'll absorb whatever flavors you throw at them. Some Roman religious cults considered broad beans sacred or forbidden. Rural families relied heavily on them during winter when fresh vegetables weren't available. The cost factor was crucial. They were basically the ultimate budget food, maximum nutrition for minimum money. But while beans provided plant protein, there was one meat that dominated Roman tables more than any other. Pork was the king of Roman meat. Not beef, not chicken, not lamb, pork. Romans ate more pig meat than everything else combined. Pigs were basically the perfect livestock. They ate garbage, lived anywhere, and turned into delicious food. Raising pigs was ridiculously easy compared to other animals. Cows needed huge pastures and tons of grass. Pigs needed whatever scraps you threw at them and a small pen. Urban families could keep pigs in tiny spaces, feeding them kitchen waste and producing fresh meat without owning farmland. Romans ate pork belly, shoulder, ribs, and even organs. Nothing went to waste when your protein source was that valuable. They basically used every part of the pig except the squeal, which wasn't edible anyway. Sausage making became sophisticated art. Roman sausages were seasoned with black pepper, wine, and cumin. Romans invented gourmet processed meat long before hot dogs became a stadium staple. Preservation was crucial since fresh pork spoiled quickly. Romans salted it, smoked it, or cured it in ash to last for months. They basically invented bacon, ham, and every other preserved pork product that people still love today. Pork was used in religious sacrifices, making it both food and offering. Romans literally ate their religious ceremonies, which seems way more practical than just burning the good stuff. Preserved pork traveled well and provided protein for troops on long campaigns. The economic impact was enormous across the empire. These 10 foods fed an empire, shaped a civilization, and kept millions of people alive for centuries. But food was just the beginning of how Romans organized their daily lives.